Okay, so in today's lecture, we're going to go over SketchUp and just an introduction to some of the basics. I know that some of you may have used SketchUp before, some of you this might be brand new, but we're going to treat it as if it's brand new, and even then, you still might learn something new about it. Even though I've been using this software for quite some time now, there are still new things that I can always learn, and so if you've used it before, a little refresher won't necessarily be a bad thing. And maybe I do things different than the way your previous instructor taught you, and so you might learn a new trick or two. So over here, I just kind of have a list of all of the different topics that we're going to cover just today. I'll do some of it of just some quick demoing, deleting it, and then going back and looking at it again. And then we'll do a quick dog house little design. So the first thing I want to speak on is the different template files that exist when you launch SketchUp. So when you have your kind of welcome screen here for SketchUp, you've got different templates that you can choose from. The main difference between these templates is ultimately the units that they are using. So if I was doing kind of a smaller product design, something more like industrial design style, I would use this simple one that uses inches. And then in this course, we'll use this architectural one because it uses feet and inches. And then these then would be in meters, millimeters, centimeters, and then architectural in meters as well. So I'm going to launch a new drawing using this architectural one. And then it's going to launch me into the SketchUp screen. Some stuff here has already been changed just from previous times that I've used SketchUp, but that's okay. So I have changed my toolbars around, and I'm actually going to change mine back to what yours looks like. So that way you can just kind of see what your toolbar kind of looks like, or what your interface looks like once you start. So you have your toolbar up at the top, and then over to the side you have this tray, which is always going to give you information about whatever tool you're currently in. So right now we have just the cursor tool or the select tool active, and the instructor panel on the side is saying that this allows us to click on different entities or different parts of our drawing and then use them to potentially modify or move whatever we might need. And then it gives us some keyboard shortcuts for how we could also then use this tool in different ways. Keep in mind, if you're on a Mac, whenever on my screen it says Control, that would be Command for you. And I believe in the version on Mac, I would imagine that it would then say Command in there instead of Control. Now, the first thing I like to do when launching SketchUp is to get rid of this toolbar at the top and replace it with a different one. So the ones that you saw already on mine. And for that, I go to the View tab up at the top, and then I click on Toolbars, and I prefer the large tool set instead of the Getting Started. So I'm going to open up the large tool set. Since most of these are the same tools that are up here, I'm just going to uncheck the Getting Started toolbar, and then I'm going to scroll down and also check on the Views toolbar. So those are the two that I prefer to work with. You can open up more of them if you wanted to, but for me, that is enough for what I like to kind of work with. So I'm just going to hit close. The reason why I prefer the large tool set over the smaller one is that in SketchUp, I am very button driven. There are keyboard shortcuts for all of these commands, but I really only use keyboard shortcuts when I'm in softwares like AutoCAD or Photoshop, and I don't know a lot of the keyboard shortcuts for SketchUp off the top of my head, because my tiny brain can only handle keyboard shortcuts for a single software. So that's why I like the large tool set over the smaller one. Now, in here, this is our drawing interface, And this is kind of where we're going to model our objects three-dimensionally. So we don't have to think too much about breaking it down into its two-dimensional faces. We are just going to draw it as a three-dimensional model. Right here, this person is mainly there to help give your project a sense of scale. I often find that having them there when I'm first starting everything out can be a little annoying and can get in the way. So what I usually do is delete the person. So if I just click on them and then hit the delete key on my keyboard, I can make them go away. And then, of course, the most important command ever is the undo command, which is Control Z. So if you ever do something and then you're like, uh-oh, I actually want that back, Control Z is undo. I can also, to get rid of her, use the eraser tool. So I can click on the eraser, and again, this instructor then tells me what it does and how to use it. But then if I click on her, she's now gone. A quick way to get back into the select tool by default is the space bar. So the space bar is the keyboard shortcut to get back to just this kind of almost like you're not in a tool necessarily, but it's just the select one. So in my drawing space, I have this whole just blank canvas to create my drawing in, and I can orbit around three-dimensionally if I hold down the scroll wheel on my mouse, just like if I clicked on it just like it was a button. So if I click on the scroll wheel, hold it down, I'll notice my cursor changes, and then I can just move my mouse around to orbit three-dimensionally. If you are not using a mouse, I implore you to please, 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 please go buy one. Do yourself a favor and get a computer mouse. But there is an option right here to click and enter the orbit tool, and then you can just hold down your left click to orbit around. And then to get out of the orbit tool, you can hit the space bar, and that puts you back again into select. Now, if I wanted to move myself around the screen without orbiting around three-dimensionally, that's what we would call a pan. And to do that, you're going to hold the shift key and the mouse scroll wheel. So if I hold shift on my keyboard and the scroll wheel down like I was going to orbit, that puts me into a pan. So pan does not shift myself around three-dimensionally. It just kind of moves me around my drawing space. And additionally, if you're not using a mouse, there is a pan button right here, and I believe it's keyboard shortcut P. Just kidding. Of course, that's push-pull, makes more sense. O, I know is orbit, and so pan, I do not know it. But I'm sure you could find it if you want to get really good with the keyboard shortcuts. So that is just kind of how I can move around my drawing space, and of course I can scroll in or scroll out to zoom in and out. Or I have zoom options here as well in my toolbar. So I can click on the zoom and zoom in and out. I could do a zoom to a window in which I draw a window around an area I want to zoom in on. Or I could do zoom extents, which kind of resets your zoom to show you your entire area that you're looking at. So that's just kind of a little bit of how to function and move around in your workspace. Now, here in my three-dimensional space, I have these three axes that are all different colors, and that is just kind of the way our three dimensions for our object are labeled. So we have this red one here is our x-axis, and then this green one is our z, and the blue one is our y. So then this is covering our width, this would be our depth, and this would be our height. And you can kind of think of where the three of them meet right here. If you want to think of it graphically, this is the origin point, and then this would be moving in a positive direction versus a negative, positive depth versus negative, positive height versus negative. If you want to think of it graphically, that's how you can work through it. I always like to start my objects on an origin point, but it is not necessary to do so. And so actually to start off, I'm not going to draw on the origin, just so you can see some of the different features that the cursor does when we highlight things. So I'm going to start by just drawing in a couple of lines. And so I'm going to use the line tool, which is located right here in our toolbar, or keyboard shortcut L. In SketchUp, you do not have to click anything or hit any key after the shortcut. So you just type the shortcut letter in and it will immediately just start that tool. So we see here that this is the line tool and it draws edges or lines. And if I click to start, if I start moving my cursor in kind of this upward direction, it's highlighting itself to be green, which is letting me know that it's parallel to the green axis. Even though it looks like it's kind of getting closer, that's because SketchUp by default is in a perspective view. And so this is telling me that this is lying flat or parallel with the green axis, versus this way I'm parallel with the red or parallel with the blue. And just like when I'm doing hand drawings, how I always start with kind of a box theory, the same thing I'll do that in SketchUp as well. So whenever I start to draw something, I always just kind of start off with a general box and then work my way out of there. So as I'm just putting these lines down and I'm not doing anything at any particular size, we'll notice too that when I get my cursor near where it would meet up with that, it's giving me just some information to say, hey, if you were looking to make a nice parallel box, all of those points would meet. And then it fills in to let me know that this is a closed surface at this point. So that means this is something that I can then make a 3D model out of. In order to make it three-dimensional then, what I'd want to do is use the push-pull tool. So the push-pull tool is located right here, or it's keyboard shortcut P, and I can click on a surface, drag it in the direction I want, and then click to place it. And additionally then I can also modify it from other surfaces too. So I can click on other surfaces and change them, or change the heights or lengths or depths that they are sitting on. I too then can go into the line tool and cut different faces off or into pieces. So it's letting me know I'm on this edge. I'm highlighted blue, so I know I'm nice and straight, nice and straight. And then I can go into the push-pull tool and I then can even take different faces out or around. If I wanted to go back into the line tool and create a window on this face. So I'm just clicking and then I can push a little window in and I can kind of work my way through or from there. But I always find it super helpful to start with drawing on all my axes. So I always want to make sure that whenever I'm drawing a line, it's highlighted to that specific color when I'm just starting off with my basic shapes. One thing that I'm not a huge fan of with starting out with is the fact that everything is in that perspective style. So these edges are all going towards a vanishing point, which can be nice to create stylized renderings of our object, but when I want to draw my objects, it isn't the nicest. So to get rid of perspective, you can go into the camera option up at the top and change it from perspective to parallel projection. And what that does is it gets rid of that towards a vanishing point style that was occurring, and now everything is just done parallel to all of those edges and lines. The reason why I also opened up this view toolbar is this then allows me to quickly just snap to an isometric style drawing versus from the top, the front, any side that I want to, and turning that projection off kind of just gives me these orthographic views that we were focusing on with our elevations or with our object models much easier than if I had to ever draw anything by hand. So I'm going to hit space to go back into the select tool, and I'm just going to highlight everything I have here and then hit the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of it. And I'm going to start something anew, but this time I'm going to use the rectangle tool, and I'm also going to show you how to use some measurements and dimensions with it. Okay, so now for the rectangle tool, there are two different options, but I always go for this rectangle corner to corner. And then I'm just going to start it flat here. So I'm just going to click to start it, drag it out, and then you can see down in here in this dimensions toolbar, it is changing numbers as I drag it. So the first number that it's showing us is the length along the red axis. So if I make this kind of short and long, we can see that that first number is 29 feet 3 3/4 of an inch, and then the second number is 2 feet 7 1/16. So that's because it's much longer on the red and shorter on the green, versus if I make it tall and skinny, we can see that that first number now is the shorter number and the second number is the longer. So if you're ever confused of which one of those numbers comes first when you're drawing, you can always, before you start typing any dimension in, you can just go kind of make it just a skinny long piece in any direction and then see which number is which one pretty easily. But before I click to make the next one, I'm going to actually type in specific measurements. So I'm going to make mine 24 feet. So in order to make sure it's recognizing it as feet, I need to put that single apostrophe, the single tick mark, and then I'll do comma 12 feet, and I'll hit enter. And so now it's not just a box where I just kind of laid out random lines. It's now a box in which I typed in specific amounts for it. I could do the same thing with the line tool. So if I started with the line tool, I can type in specific lengths. So again, you can see here that there are numbers coming into play. A thing to keep in mind with SketchUp is that you don't want to ever use dashes, because it's actually going to read that dash as 8 feet minus 3 inches. So that line is not 8'3". If I hit escape to end it and I just draw another line here, and I do this one as 8'3" without the dash, this line here is 8'3". This line here is 7'9", because of the fact that it read this as 8 foot minus 3 and it read this one as 8'3". So you never want to put that measurement in there. And I can even put like a quick dimension that's 7'9" versus 8'3". And this is a tool we're going to go over in the next lecture, so don't worry about that too much. I just wanted to prove to you that that's what that dash mark does. So it can be helpful in that you can use SketchUp to make some quick calculations for you without having to do any math, but you just want to be a little wary when you are typing your measurements in. So let me just hit delete on my keyboard and get rid of that. And I have now my rectangle here with my measurements. If I wanted to show wall thickness on these, on this kind of structure or this house that I'm kind of building here, I can easily do that using the offset tool, which is located right here, or keyboard shortcut O on your keyboard. Just kidding, that's orbit. I don't know what offset is then. F. It's F. Yeah. See, I did know. So I could click here or use keyboard shortcut F, and it's going to make a copy of lines at a uniform distance from the original. So it's going to make a nice parallel copy. So if I click on this object, we can see then that it's just going to make a smaller kind of rectangle inside of it, or I could have it go outside if I wanted to. And I could type in a specific amount if I wanted, or I can just click to eyeball it. So I still have a distance option in here. So I can say that I just want it to go 6 inches, and SketchUp, even though we're in architectural, it's still recognizing our units as inches. So if I don't put any marker in it, it's going to assume 6 inches. One thing I've seen students do, which is then going to cause this program to just error, is they put 2 apostrophes as a mark of inches when that's not how you would type it in. So if you wanted to put a unit marker, you're going to put a quotation mark. So a quotation mark is very different than 2 apostrophes. And so if you hold shift and hit the apostrophe key, that would be recognized as inches. However, you technically do not have to put in any marker, and it'll automatically recognize it as inches. And now I actually have 2 spaces. So if I go back into the select tool or hit the space bar, I have this face here and this face here. So this then can act as my walls versus this then could be a floor. So if I go into my push-pull tool, I now can raise these walls up separate from the floor itself. So I could raise them to a specific height if I wanted. I could type in a specific distance, and I could do 8 feet. If I'm doing feet, I need to make sure that I'm putting that single tick mark. And then I've got walls that are 8 feet high. And then I can use my tools to draw in rectangles to put in like an opening for a window. And if I wanted to, or I'll put a door here too, and I'm just eyeballing these. And then if I wanted to cut them out, I would use push-pull, and I could click on this and bring it to where it says it's going to on face. And now that's just a hole there. Bring this one in, and I can only bring it as far as where that face ends. And now if I orbit around, these are just holes in that area to work with. So we've gone over a lot of this stuff already. So we're zooming through. Wonderful, wonderful. And now we're just going to look at some components versus groups and how we can copy and paste things as well. And then the paint tool. And then we'll start with our little doghouse practice for today. So components and groups, once I learned about them, a lot of what I was frustrated with within SketchUp became much easier. So for those of you who have perhaps used SketchUp beforehand and found it to be a very aggravating software, one of the reasons why might be because you didn't have kind of components and groups as one of the tools in your little arsenal. Not a lot of people use them right from the start, and I think that is really poopy just because they can make things a lot easier. And we'll look at the main difference between the two of them right now. So what I'm going to do is in the select tool, I'm going to highlight everything in here. So I'm just going to click and drag and just highlight the whole object. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to make it a component. And from a component, it wants you to give it a name. You don't have to give it a name. You can just leave it named as component 1, but I'm just going to call this home demo. And you can put in different attributes in here for things if you want to, but I'm just going to leave all of this stuff and just click create. And so now it's a component. And so you can see now when I click on it, or even if I click and drag to highlight the whole thing, it's not giving me those dotted out faces anymore. It's just clicking on the entire object. Versus if I have something similar over here, and I'm just eyeballing this so it's not going to be identical, but here's another little trick too, is if I want to bring this up to the same height, I can actually click on there, and now these are at the same height. But with this, since this isn't a component, I can click on each one of these faces, each one of these edges individually. Because this is a component, the entire thing is selected all at once. Making things into components or groups is great, so that way when I go to put in like the roof or go to put furniture in here, I'm not accidentally clicking on edges and then accidentally deleting that edge and now just making a bunch of weird two-dimensional faces and planes in my object. So let me Control Z to bring that back. A lot of times students will not group something or not make it into a component, and then later on accidentally click on like an edge, not realize they have it selected, delete it, and then everything just becomes this wonky mess later on down the line, and it becomes so hard to fix. Because once it becomes a wonky mess, and especially if it's been sitting there for 20 minutes and you didn't realize it was too wonky, because if I was looking at my object from this side and I click on that edge and I delete it, let's even find one. Let's say I accidentally somehow click on that edge and I delete it. If I'm looking at it from this side, nothing seems wrong, because I'll even Control Z to bring that edge back. From this view, nothing looks like it changed at all. But it could have been that I did that totally on accident, didn't realize I did it, kept on working for 20, 30 minutes, and all of a sudden now I have this huge problem that is so difficult to fix that really the only way to fix it, the easiest way to fix it, is to go back to keep undoing until I get back to having not deleted that edge on accident. And then I have to go undo the past 30 minutes of work to get everything back. So what components and groups do, let me just hold shift and scroll wheel to get back here, is it makes this entity now one piece. So if I go to put furniture in here, this is acting separate from the furniture I put in. If I add on roof features, this is acting separate. The only way I can edit this is if I double click on it and see how this got grayed out. So now, and it put this little box around it. So now I can click on individual faces and I can edit different parts or features, but it's only when I'm in this component actively can I make changes to this component, and it's not going to have any effect on the other parts. How to get out of it is if you click outside of that box that it creates. So again, if I double click on it, if I click anywhere outside this box, now the component is no longer active. The other thing I can do is right click on it, edit component, and then I can right click again and say close. And that can get me out. But we'll see the difference between components and groups, because what I'll do here is over here, I'm gonna put in like a little window feature on this building, and then I'm gonna highlight this one, right click, and I'm gonna make this one a group. So this is a group versus this being a component. They don't look, whoops, I did that window a little wonky. There we go. So what I did to fix that, in case you ever are making something in your windows wonky, I brought it back too far. And so then instead of it cutting out a hole, it just made this weird face here. So I just clicked on it and then I moved my mouse so this way it's forcing it to go to the face, clicked again, and now it's a cutout hole. And then I'll just right click, close the group. So that way I'm no longer editing that group. But this is a group versus this is a component. They operate in a lot of the same ways of the fact that I have to double click inside this to edit it, click outside to get out of editing, double click inside to edit versus click to outside. Can't edit any of the features on it while the group isn't active. So if I go to draw a window on this, I can draw on this face and I can use the push-pull tool to do a push-pull, but it's not going to make a cutout because in order to edit anything on the faces of this group, I have to be inside that group. So I can still borrow measurements, draw things to features, but I can't actively edit this particular piece. Now, the big difference between a group and a component that I've been promising. So I'm going to make copies of both of these. So I'm going to just click on this group, Control C to copy it, Control V to paste, and I'm just going to put it over here. And then I'm going to hit the space bar to go back into the select tool. I'm going to do the same thing with this component, Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I'm just going to put it over there. And then we'll just put ourselves into a 3D view, isometric. So I've got 2 copies of this group and 2 copies of this component. And since they both operate with that same, you can't edit the feature without being in it, it kind of is, what's the point, or why should I choose a component versus a group? And the difference is how those copies can act towards each other. So with these being groups, if I double clicked on this object and I decided I wanted to add in a door here, I can go into the rectangle tool, I can draw a door on this face, and then I can use the push-pull tool to take this door and bring it in through. And now this one has this window feature and this door. This one still looks exactly as it did from the very beginning. So with groups act independently from each other. And then I'll go back into the select tool by just hitting the space bar, right click, close group. So this is independent from this. If I made any changes to the original, still nothing's going to happen to its copied version. With a component, that is not the case. So if I double click on a component and I go make changes to it, even if I just wanted to change the overall height, I could go into the push-pull tool and see how even when I just hover over features, the one in the copy also hovers. And as I pull this face out, the copy also gets pulled. If I pull this height up, the copy also is going to go. So with a component, these two objects are still linked to each other. And so if I make any changes to the original, the copy is going to change as well. That can be very handy with these small features that you have inside of a design. So for instance, if I designed a kitchen table with a chair sitting around it, and I had 6 of that same chair all sitting around the table. If I then wanted to make changes to one of the chairs, if they were components, I could just change that one chair and all 6 of those chairs would update automatically. So that way I wouldn't have to go make that same change 6 times. Versus if I had detailed the framing components of the window sitting here in this just rough opening for a window. I can just change that one window, and every time it's used in my building, it could update. Versus with groups are great if it's just one feature that you don't need to have repeating over and over and over and over and over. So, but groups and components are super important for when you are going to be modeling things with more than one part or piece inside of it. And so your big SketchUp project is going to have to include multiple components, multiple different features inside of it. And that's where having things either grouped or made into components is going to make it much less of a headache. So once you put your basic structure together, grouping them is going to be a huge lifesaver for you that I super duper recommend you do. Next thing we'll look at before we start our little doghouse is the paint tool, which just allows us to fill in different faces of our objects with materials. So with groups and components, again, in order to do anything to a particular face, you need to double click inside to turn that on and then click outside to turn it off. Because otherwise it is going to apply the material to every face, which in some cases that's just fine. It's exactly what we want it to do. And so I'll show you in that right now. So the paint bucket tool is located right up here, and it's going to open up just a little feature here in your default tray that has like your little instructor, and it'll tell you how the paint tool works. And we have different materials that we can pick from. So we've got some specific material styles we can use. We've got different carpets we could put in. Then there's just colors added. And then there's colors with specific names to them. I don't know if they are like Pantones named or not. But so I don't know where exactly the names come through. But we've got a couple of different features or different types that we can use. If you're using the paint bucket tool and everything is grouped or a component, so if I go here and add in this translucent glass with a sky reflection and I put it here on my component, by default it's then going to cover every single edge and every face of that component. Same thing for a group. If I go into this metal one and I click the material I want, it's going to apply it to every face. So if I want to apply it only to specific faces of that group, I need to go back into my select tool, which is right here, or the space bar, double click. So now I'm editing this group, and then I can choose a specific material and I can apply it just to singular faces. And then I can say I want this face here, and I can apply it to whatever faces I may want to apply it to. So if you want to do singular faces of something, which with like a structure of a building, you're going to want a different material on the outside than the inside. And that's going to come into play when we are working with SketchUp. And then to get out of this group, again, just right click, close group, or go into the select tool and just click outside of that box that it pops up in. So if I wanted to edit this one, I can just double click on it, click the color I want. But again, since this is a component versus this being a group, if I make changes to this one, it's going to make changes to all of them, which again, could be something you want. So you just need to kind of think about that when you're choosing if you wanted to use a component or a group. For the 3D warehouse, I'm actually going to show that to you using kind of our in-class demo. So I'm going to highlight everything I have here. So I'm just going to click and drag a big window around everything I have, and then hit the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of it. And we're going to start off today with just designing or making a little doghouse style building, just a nice quick little small structure for the second greatest creatures on this planet after cats. But I still love a good dog. So I'm going to start off with my doghouse using the rectangle tool, and I'm just going to put it flat on this face. I'm going to start mine at the origin point, and the fact that it is this blue color just means that I am flat on my face here, as opposed to if I was drawing it like upward. And I'm going to make mine, I'm pretty zoomed out, so I can tell with these dimensions in the corner down here. I was pointing at them with my finger, and then I realized this is a recording, you can't see it. It doesn't look really too big to me, but if I'm looking at those dimensions, this is about 11.5 feet by almost 25 feet. It's a pretty large doghouse. So you can't always just go off by eyeballing it. So I'm going to make mine about, let's do 3 feet by, so comma, 5 feet. I'll do 3 foot by 5 foot, and I'll hit enter. And then that really kind of helps me with the size, and I'm just going to scroll to zoom in on it. And then I'm going to use the offset tool to just offset my walls of this in, and we'll go in, let's do 5 inches. And since it's inches, I don't have to put any marker for it. I can just do 5, enter. And then I've got kind of the walls of my doghouse ready. And I'm going to use the push-pull tool to bring this up. Let's go up 3 feet. Enter. So I'll orbit around, and I've got kind of the base of my doghouse ready to go. I'm going to need to add in a little cutout for my pup to be able to get in here. So I'm going to set my view to look at it head on from the front. And I'm going to draw a rectangle in on this edge up. And I'm just going to wing it to be that size. And I want to put like a nice little arc there too. So I'm going to use this arc tool to say I want it to start there. Click on there, and I'm just going to bring it straight up as a half circle. And then I'm going to go into my select tool. So I just hit the space bar on my keyboard to click on this edge, and I'm just going to hit the delete key on my keyboard to get rid of it. So now that is just one feature, and then I'll use the push-pull tool to pull that into the face so I've got a little cutout for my pup. If you made yours a little bit bigger or smaller, that can be just fine. The purpose of this exercise is just to make sure that we've got like the basic skills to build it, not that you've used like the same measurements as me. So now that I've got just like the base for the house kind of started, I'm going to hit the space bar again to go in my select tool, click and drag a big window around it, and then right click, and I'm going to make this a group because I'm about to start adding in some line work for my roof, and I don't want to accidentally mess up one of the edges here, one of the corners, and then potentially make this into a big mess. So I'm just going to make it a group and then look at it again right from the front. So I'm just going to click here on the front, and then I'm going to hold shift in my scroll wheel just to pan my drawing around. So I'll start adding in some lines for my roof, and I'm going to go into the line tool. I'm going to start it in this corner, and I'm just going to pick like an angle to bring it down at, and I'll say that. And what's nice is it's going to highlight this magenta color to help me know that I am going to be making it perpendicular. So I'm going to go out, I'll say 4 inches, enter, and then if I hover over the middle, it's going to let me know where the midpoint of that is. I was hoping it would give me another perpendicular. Don't know why it's not. Line. It should. It has in the past. So weird. It's giving me a perpendicular again, but not if I typed in a specific distance. So I'm just going to leave that as that random amount. And it's kind of letting me know that if I travel along this path, I'm going to be perpendicular. And that if I get to that point, it's then going to be clicking right where that midpoint is. So I'll hit escape. I'll then use this edge to just kind of travel up. Back down. And I want it to let me know when I'm lined up with that point. So if I hover over it, it'll let me know like where those two would meet. Hover over, where would those two meet? And then I can click to finish it. So I've got this now drawn as a nice even style roof. I'm going to go into push-pull and just pull it back. I want to pull it a little bit further away from where the back edge is. And I'll do then the same thing. I'll click on this front edge and I'll pull it out. And once I have that roof style the way I want, I'm going to hit the space bar, draw a big window around it, and then right click, make it a group. But first, I'm actually going to undo. So let me Control Z. So that way it's no longer a group. And I'm going to show you why I'm drawing my windows from the left to the right instead of right to left. So if I started down here and I drew this window, see how this has that dotted edge to it? If I release it, it also is going to include this. So this is what we call a window selection, and this is what we call a cross selection. So a window selection only includes objects that are fully inside of it. So the reason why when I drag this way, it doesn't include the house portion is because this is all this entire piece and does not fit all the way inside my window. Versus if I went this way, it includes the house part, because for a cross selection, it only has to just barely touch what I'm drawing. So if I just made a window like that, it's going to select this edge, this face, just because all they had to do was barely touch. So that's why I prefer this window selection, because it has to be entirely inside to get selected. And then I'll right click, make it a group, and now I have my roof and then this part of my house separate. So I'm going to then adjust this part of my group here by going into my front view and then double clicking on this component, or on this group rather, to edit it. And then I'm just going to draw a line from that point to that point to that point to that one. So I just drew a little triangle to fill it in. And it actually did it in the front, which is kind of weird, but okay. And I'm just going to use the push-pull tool to pull it back. Which, whoops, I deleted it now. Because I don't want to just pull that all the way up. That's going to be ugly. That's one thing we could do, is we could pull this all the way up, but I'll do it the other way instead. So let's try that again. I'm going to do the line tool. I guess I could start it on this back edge. Draw it to there. And this seems like more effort than I want to, though. Ooh, I've got an idea. So actually, here, I'll start over fresh. So I'm in this group. I'm just going to draw a triangle in here. I'll orbit around to look at it. And then I'm going to pull it out. I believe I made the doghouse walls 5 thick. So I'm just going to pull it 5. And then hit the space bar. Then I'm going to highlight it and come here to the move tool and move that back. Whoop. See, this is what I was talking about with weird things happening. Oh, because I'm in the component. Okay. Then my new plan actually would involve me not being in that component. So I'm just going to click outside of it, look at it from the front, go into the line tool, make my triangle here. So I don't have this component active. And then I'm going to press pull it 5, enter, hit the space bar to go into the select tool, highlight the whole thing, right click, make it a group. And so I had to make sure I was coming from it from back here. Then I can go into the move tool, click on this corner, bring it to back there. And then I'll make a copy of it to put on the other one. So I'll Control C to copy, Control V to paste, and I'm just going to put it floating back here, hold my scroll wheel around to orbit, and then pick it by a corner. I know where I want that corner to go. So I pick it up by this front corner and then place it in that corner. Could there be other ways to do this? Why, sure. But this is how I chose to do it and place it in there. And it works just the same. So whoops, I still have the move tool active. So let me hit space to get out of the move tool. Now I can start to add in my different materials. First two, I'll put in an ugly little ground, or I mean a nice quaint little ground, a big old yard for my pup. And then I'm going to go into the paint bucket tool. And then I can add in some different materials for it. So I'll go into the siding one and I'll pick what I want. I don't think I want brick. Why won't you update? Yeah, I like that. I'll go with that siding. You could pick whatever you want. If you want to make a brick house for yours, go for it. And then I'm even gonna go back into my select tool. So I'll hit the space bar. I'll double click in there because I want to put a nice little, we're going to paint the inside for my puppy. Nice little mint green. I'm going to do some of the interior walls. For my pup, they get a nice mint green. I'll double click outside. For my roof, I'll go into the roofing one. We'll pick out some shingles. Beautiful, perfect. And then maybe I even want to put a little nameplate on here. So this isn't something we were gonna cover today, but we'll put in some 3D text. My dog's name was Teeter, so I'll also have it say Teeter. I could put it at a different size, which I'm definitely going to have to because that's way too big for my house. Oh no, poor Teeter. Make it 6 inches tall. And then we'll put it there, and we'll add in our material for our ground too, so that'll be in landscaping. We'll pick out a nice lush grass. Whoops, Control Z to undo that. Then I'll have to double click on this component so that way I could fill in just the ground with grass. So what's happening here, these two different planes or these two different faces are at the exact same spot, and so they're kind of competing for attention almost. And that's why it was clipping, but since I now have them as the same material, they're not really competing for anything anymore. And then lastly, I'll add in a precious little pup in here. And so to do that, I'm going to go into the 3D warehouse. So the 3D warehouse is located right here in your toolbar. And you are going to need to have an account to log into the 3D warehouse, but you should already have an account made just from opening or downloading SketchUp on your computer, and it is completely free to access the 3D warehouse, or to make an account rather for SketchUp. So in the warehouse, this is where different companies or just people using SketchUp as well are going to upload designs that they have made for you to then use in your own plans or in your own models. So if I was creating a bedroom or dorm room design in SketchUp and I wanted to kind of make it look as much like a dorm as possible, I could go and put this little iPad on a desk and it'll just kind of help make it seem more realistic. Or I could put in this desk, or I could add in these wood moldings to my design and extrude them out further. Or if I was trying to show a site plan for an entire city, I could put this bus in. Here's a lamp that I could put in there. So a lot of these are done by specific companies because they want you to showcase their designs in your work. So specific companies will have all of their stuff in there for you to use. But then you can also search. So up at the top here, I'm just going to search for dog. And by default, look at that pup. By default, it's going to give us products from specific catalogs. My assumption is that it's because these people have paid Google or paid Trimble money to feature their stuff above everyone else. But if I click on models, it's now just showing me models of dogs that anybody has made, and they have just labeled it as a dog. Here is a crude one of a dog pooping, but he's not modeled super well. Here's a dog that is modeled extremely well. Here's another dog that's modeled super well. You will find dog houses that other people have made too. So you could just go search for a dog house. I'm looking for a dog that looks like Teeter, a Minecraft dog, but it's Maycraft. Looking for a dog that looked like Teeter. But I don't know if I could find one because she was a weird looking dog. But you can find any dog that you want to go put in your... That kind of looks like her. Any dog you might want to put in your doghouse. I'm not going to spend all of your day searching for my weird toothless dog. But I like looking at these puppies. But okay, I gotta pick one. We're going with you. We're going with you, you cool beagle. So I'm just going to click on that download and say, yes, I want to load this into my model. And bada boom, I've got this dog. It's pretty big by default. So I can then use the scale tool here to shrink it down uniformly. And then I'll go into the move tool to move it around so I can kind of put my dog, near my dog house or in it. By default, this person put a grass around it, which is why its component box is so large. So if I double click on it, I can edit this component and I can get rid of like this grass that they gave me by just clicking on it and deleting it. And then I'll double click outside of it. Now it's a little bit more manageable of a sweet little puppy to put outside my house. Look how sweet you are. Look how adorable you are. And so that is how we can load components in and scale them and move them around. Sometimes the components you're going to see or have featured are like smart components, which then are a little bit trickier to maneuver around or alter for our own purposes, but we can always try our best to see if we can. In our next lecture, we'll focus a little bit more on the 3D warehouse and how we can find things to import in, as well as dealing with some of the other layout features, some of the different style components, and a couple of the more advanced features of SketchUp. But this was a quick crash course in SketchUp. Make sure you save your work, so File, Save, and please make sure you're saving it as an SKP file. A couple of times I got students sending me things as an SKB, which I can't use. I don't know what that is. So an SKP, please. So don't bother changing this file type. You're just going to change the file name. And I'll see you in the next one.